Well, the country's premiers are meeting today, and they're expected to discuss federal health care funding. The federal NDP have been calling for increased health care funding to help with staffing issues.
For more on this, we're joined live by the federal NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, this afternoon on Live at Noon. Mr. Singh, thanks for joining us here. We'll get to what's happening in Ottawa as well, but first, let's talk about what the New Democrats would like to see come out of these meetings. I know health care funding is something you've been pushing for significantly over the last several years.
Yeah, what we've seen is that our healthcare system has been continually pushed into a point of collapse every time there's a wave, and it's just inexcusable to have that happen. Our healthcare needs to be there for people and their loved ones when they need it most. Our healthcare workers are burnt out. Things are really desperate. People are really frustrated. And part of the problem is there's been decades of underfunding from the federal government to provinces and territories, and we want to see an increase in funding so we can protect our healthcare system. I passionately believe that our healthcare should be available to anyone, no matter how much they earn or what's in their bank account. And to protect that system, we need to fund it properly.
Okay, Mr. Singh, aside from funding, do you think that the federal government should get involved when it comes to, let's say, implementing national standards for long-term care? We heard Premier Ford say something about, hey, if there's money on the table from the federal government, I'll come and talk about this. What's your stance?
Absolutely. There needs to be checks and balances. We need to make sure that we're putting resources towards a goal, and there needs to be some accounting for that. When it comes to long-term care, what we saw in Ontario and in Quebec and across Canada were deplorable conditions, heartbreaking situations where our loved ones were left in their own waste, were not tended to for hours and hours, were dehydrated. These conditions continue. And what we need to do is establish what are the best practices, make sure that we're funding it appropriately. And frankly, we need to get rid of the for-profit model, because otherwise our public dollars are going into the pockets of rich investors, and that should not be happening. Every dollar we spend should go towards the care of our loved ones, not towards making companies richer.
Okay, we haven't had a federal leader on this week, Mr. Singh, so I need to ask you about the situation in Ottawa. I'm not sure where you're joining us from this afternoon, but you're obviously very well aware of what's happening in Ottawa. What is your assessment of the situation here? It seemed to start with a trucking protest over vaccine mandates for crossing the border back and forth, but it has certainly ballooned and expanded beyond that.
Well, there's been really troubling things. I've been in close contact with people in Ottawa. There are, of course, we saw some of the hateful imagery, the swastika and the Confederate flag. There's no place for that in Canada. We also saw some really heinous actions of defaming or desecrating the War Memorial, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, as well as some vandalism of the Terry Fox Memorial. Again, these are completely wrong, and there's no place for that type of behavior. What I do want to acknowledge, though, while the convoy does not represent truckers have real concerns. They're worried about unpaid wages. They're worried about work conditions. But this convoy doesn't represent those concerns of truckers. But there is also a broader frustration of Canadians. People are angry, and they have right to be angry. The pandemic seems to never end. Housing prices keep on going up. People can't afford their groceries. Times are tough. And we have to have a plan to get out of this pandemic and solve some of these problems to address that frustration that's Canada-wide.
Mr. Singh, I'm curious to know what your position is. Do you kind of agree with what Prime Minister Trudeau is doing by saying, hey, I'm not dropping these federal mandates, even though these protesters, these demonstrators in Ottawa are saying we're not going anywhere?
Well, these protesters don't represent the concerns of truckers, and they don't really represent the concerns of Canadians. But what's happening is people are angry. And the organizers of this convoy are tapping into that anger that Canadians feel and are trying to express that and channel that into something that doesn't make a lot of sense. They're protesting mandates that are not federal, they're actually provincial. So it really doesn't make sense what they're doing. But I do believe that Mr. Trudeau has a responsibility to provide leadership Canada-wide, to give a path forward, to say, hey, this is how we're going to get out of this pandemic. Here's how we can solve some of the problems that people are frustrated with. And I feel like that would help. I also think it's clear that both the Conservatives and the Liberals are using this convoy to score political points. They're using it and weaponizing the convoy. The Conservatives want to make it a problem of Trudeau. Trudeau wants to draw a line in the sand. I'm saying the goal here should be, how do we provide leadership to the rest of Canada, to the people who are genuinely frustrated, to people who are genuinely angry? How do we provide leadership? That's what I'm calling for.
They've raised about $10 million. There's an enormous amount of people that were sort of on bridges and overpasses last week as they were making their way to Ottawa. It seems like there is a significant chunk of the population, maybe not the majority, but a large number who do support what seems to be happening here. What does that say to you about the state of Canada and its politics and its sort of level of unity?
Well, I want to be clear on a couple of things. One is the vast majority of Canadians are vaccinated and support doing what they can to stay safe and healthy. But I mentioned this before, there is a real sentiment of anger in Canada, and that anger is legitimate. People literally can't find a place to call home. People can't afford their groceries. People are wondering, how do we get out of this pandemic? And those are real concerns, and we can't allow this convoy to be the voice for that anger. That anger is real. People are frustrated, and we need to start providing real solutions. And that's why I'm saying it can't be that the Liberals use this as an opportunity to wedge the Conservatives. The Conservatives shouldn't be using this as an opportunity to attack the Liberals. We need to provide real leadership, and that's what's been missing. Neither Mr. Trudeau nor the Conservatives have shown that leadership, and that's what I want to do, is provide a real outlet. People are angry, and there are solutions to fix those problems. Let's get to work on those solutions.
All right, federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you.